All right, it's our favorite time of the week. We've got the undisputed hydroweight champion Harley Smith on one side. We've got the organic mechanic from Kelp4less.com on the other. And here we are. We're just going to have a discussion. We'll see what pops up. I know I've been on the road quite a bit, doing conventions and seminars and things all over. And it's this time of year that a lot of that takes place. You know, coming out of winter, everybody's thinking about getting their crop started, getting their soil prepared for planting, and we're about to kick off another spring season here. And one thing that stood out in all these places I've been and all the speakers they've had at these events is plant disease, again, fungicides, what to use, how to use it, how to treat it, and it's all chemical related. So I sat through a 4-hour seminar that was all about plant diseases and then what chemical coincides with the treatment of that. And I mean, these are the highest of the highest educated, PhDs, and there wasn't one thing mentioned about plant protection, about anything natural or biological or organic or any preventative measures to prevent these diseases. It was all about how to spot them and what chemical to use. And so, being the person I am, I keep raising my hand. Well, can we do this? Can we take steps to try to prevent this disease? And anyway, I was not included in that discussion. They didn't like my interruptions all the time. But it's mind-boggling how there's so much focus on the chemical treatment and so much focus on, don't letting these diseases develop. We got to start quick, and once we get started on the chemical applications, we have to keep up on them and keep doing them. And it gets frustrated. It makes me frustrated that there's nothing about plant health, plant nutrition, biology, anything in a preventative measure. And so, if all these treatments worked, why do we keep having the same diseases year after year after year after year? We just keep compounding the chemical treatments and fungicides and things like that, and it's very frustrating. And I know me and you talk a lot about preventative measures and things you can do, just little things. And there's so much that's focused around biology and the natural defense mechanisms of plants and different fungi that really can help stimulate the plant to fight off some of these attacks and so on and so forth. So anyway, that's been my week in review. Met some really good people, got some really good new customers, but sitting through those chemical seminars is just daunting.
Yeah, yeah, I know it. It's crazy. I mean, it's not crazy. It's just the real world. But the chemicals work pretty much, pretty effective. They're at least you can anticipate the results. But the cost, the effect on the environment, the fact that the insects or the fungi eventually adapt. Those are all big problems that we've talked about and discussed. Um, I went last week. I went to a bed and breakfast, and the it was at a llama farm. But this lady has been a very an organic gardener, really into nutrition and things for years, for 30 years or more. Okay, which is great. But what she was telling me is she took a soil analysis and brought it to the university for testing, and they didn't even talk to her about the trace elements at all, which activate enzyme. And the only advice they gave her is more nitrogen. Use more nitrogen. Is that the answer to everything? And that I think is the worst
Right.
answer when it comes to prevention of diseases. If you overdo it with nitrate nitrogen, the Brix goes down, the
Hmm.
roots are not developed as much. The energy doesn't go to the roots. The nutrient uptake for other elements like trace elements is reduced, and you get big cells with thin cell walls, which are more subject to pest and disease and fungi.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
and that's just one thing. I mean, that's just plant nutrition alone. Without the thinking about the microbes and what they can do to benefit the
Hmm.
plant.
That's exactly right. We see that all the time. We see that all the time. All these soil tests come back. More nitrogen, more nitrogen, more nitrogen. And so many of the trace elements and micronutrients and things like that aren't even taken into consideration. So I totally agree. And it's a proven fact that excess nitrate and excess ammonia, off-gassing ammonia, attracts insects. It's a
Yeah,
proven, I mean, it's a proven fact that, they respond to that.
yeah. It takes a lot of energy away from photosynthesis. I mean, a good proportion. I can't remember the exact amount, but it's something like 40% of, you know, let me forget the percentages for a second here. I don't want to get it wrong.
Okay.
but the assimilation of nitrates is in the chloroplast of the nitrate nitrogen. It takes a lot of energy for the plant to convert the nitrates into nitrites and then into amino acids, and from the amino acids into the other the other amino acids and enzymes. Okay, so it takes a lot of energy. Something like 40% of the energy.
Wow.
I don't know exactly, but I think that's about it. Um, so if you and it's a luxury element. So you give the because in nature nitrates are kind of scarce. They're not part of the minerals in the soil. They're being involved in the recycling of organic matter, basically, and from the microbes fixing the nitrogen. So they're in. So if the plant has access to nitrates, it's going to take it up, whether it needs it or not. You give it more nitrates, stimulates the enzymes in the plant, take up those nitrates too. Give them some more, they'll let's take that in as well. So even if they don't need it, and they'll store up some for later. But in the meantime, that they're burning up the energy from photosynthesis, the photosynthates for the top growth, but it's restricting the extra photosynthates, the sugars, that are shipped to the roots, so it restricts the root growth. And we know what's happening there. We're starting to shut the engine down for taking up water and nutrients and, and being able to take up the trace elements like iron, copper, and manganese and zinc, some of which those transition metals are hard for the plant to take up anyway. So it's a vicious cycle. It can't take
Exactly.
up. Yeah.
Exactly. And do you know how much harder it is for a plant to take up calcium when it's overstimulated with nitrate? I,
Mm.
yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. They always say calcium is one of the hardest minerals for a plant to uptake. And when it's constantly doing what you just described with the nitrate, generally a calcium deficiency follows. I've seen that many, many times.
Well, I can see part of it too. If you're restricting the root growth, you're definitely going to the active root growth. Let's put it that way, because remember, calcium is only taken up from the unsuberized part of the root hairs, the growing roots. The part that's the older roots, or even the besides just the tip along there, is suberized. The plant can't take up calcium. So you really need actively growing roots to be able to take up the calcium in the first place. So if you're not getting a good, not just root mass, but actively growing, then you're going to potential for having a more difficulty in the uptake of calcium and iron. Iron's the same way. That's just the ends there. So they're limiting factors in soil.
As always, you lay it out so easy to understand, Harley. That
Yeah.
excellent. Thank you very much. And that may lead us to another part of our conversation about again the beneficial fungi that are in the root zone and on roots and surround the roots. And there's some very particular species that can really, really help a plant in that protection and protection from disease, protection from fungus, and so on and so forth. And it seems like almost every time we get together, we end up talking about this.
Like we said, we can talk about it from different points of view. You want to talk about nutrient uptake? Talk about microbes. You want to talk about disease resistance? Talk about, even if it's the same microbe, they, plants and microorganisms have co-evolved on the planet, not just to help the plant survive, but to help the plants thrive. So it's, when talking about thriving, reaching genetic potential, you take the microorganisms out of the picture, you're not going to reach the true genetic potential of the plant. And that includes resistance to pests and disease. They can't run away. They make phytoalexins to fight off, but the microorganisms can stimulate that, and they can also make plant protection agents right in the root zone. Not only, the trichoderma hertzianum, or Trichoderma hamilton. There's been a lot of studies on that. They not only protect the plant against root pathogens, but they protect the plant against foliar pathogens.
Now, how does that work?
Yeah. Well, we're not 100%. I mean, there's probably a lot going on that we don't understand yet. But one of the things that they are attributed it to, one major factor, is the systemic induced response, the SIR response of the plant. That is part of the jasmonic acid pathway in the plant. Okay, and that can be activated by certain microorganisms, including the trichoderma. I'll give you an example. Even it's beyond compost too. You think, oh, our organics, the compost is going to do the job for you for for pest resistance. Yeah, it helps. Of course, it feeds the microbes. But there was one university study that studied 77 different potting soils that included compost. And out of those 77 samples, only one of them stimulated resistance against the foliar pathogens. One out of 77.
Hmm.
And the reason is the compost, the commercial compost, is usually done in large windrows,
Oh, yeah.
and it gets really hot in the center of that. And then they have the curing in even larger windrows, several, maybe 5 or 6, 8 meters high. And what will happen is it gets warm in there, and about the mesophiles, which are the best at stimulating systemic induced response, SIR, the immune system, priming the immune system, those are killed off. They'll come back a lot of times, but over time. But the bacillus, they make it through there. They sporulate, then come right back. But those ones that are the very best at stimulating the immune system, the systemic induced response, are the mesophiles. So if you're growing, even if you're using organically, if you're using some kind of a peat mix with compost in it, you still want to inoculate to get the best effect. And they found that by inoculating with that Trichoderma hertzianum, it was just as effective as the synthetic fungicide, the chloroethanol or something. I think that's what it's called.
Wow. That's important.
The weekly treatments of the foliar spray and the activation of the immune system, equally effective against the
Wow.
fungi.
Wow. That's neat. Interesting. I mean, that's very interesting. And, a lot of our microbial blends that we use and mix together and sell, we put different species of trichoderma in those. Trichoderma, trichoderma, tomato, however you want to say it. But,
Yeah.
yeah, boy, that's a good explanation, because a lot of times we can recognize the name, but we really don't understand the function of it, when it's all put together. So once again, wow, that's impressive.
Yeah. And there are all the SIR that primes the plant. It puts it on alert. So if it's under attack, the immune system responds quickly. SAR, systemic acquired resistance, is the salicylic acid pathway, and that typically is activated after the plant's under some kind of attack or stress. And when that happens, the plant will divert some of its primary metabolites that it uses to grow. It'll divert them into making secondary metabolites, like the phytoalexins, so the plant itself manufactures fungicides. So really, there's two sides of this. SIR, prime the plant, sensitize it. SAR, activate the immune system after it's under attack. And many of the beneficial strains of bacteria and fungi, including trichoderma, will do both. So it primes the plant before and then helps with the activation afterwards. I'm going to say
Let,
one other thing here,
yeah,
and
go
I'll
ahead.
give it back to you. But see, I mean, we're just talking about this, just some basic things that we know about microbes, and they didn't talk about any of that at the
Oh no,
conference. I
no,
mean, come on.
absolutely not.
The
Yeah.
other part of this is the calcium that you're talking about. The plants will, takes up the calcium. They're going to pump calcium into the vacuoles inside the cell. Okay, store it there. There's very little in the cytoplasm. It's pumped in there. It's either in the cell walls, which are plant protection against fungi, or or stored. Now, once that SAR, the systemic acquired resistance, clicks in, the plant's under attack. The plant will literally send from the surface of the leaf, the foliar disease, it sends a signal molecule from the leaf to the vacuole to open up calcium ion channels inside the cell. When that opens that up, thousands or even millions of calcium ions flow into the cytoplasm, the stored ones. It activates a series of enzymes through calmodulin that creates an oxidative burst. And that's the plant's first line of defense against fungi. So here we go again. We overdo it with nitrogen, it weakens the plant. You can't get enough calcium ions, the secondary messenger. It's going to weaken the response. And you don't have the microbes, you're not going to get the response in the first place. So there's another side of that. The plant will use the calcium to activate and magnify the immune and disease response of the plant, the natural response of the plant,
What was that? What was that again? Oh,
the
oh,
natural response
that
of the
can
plant.
happen.
You sure can. The plant do it, and the microbes help with that whole process.
So let me ask you, when you were talking about the metabolites, and can those same metabolites be developed in some of, a lot of our customers do their own biological brews or their compost teas or like a thing like living water. Can some of those same metabolites be developing within the tank before you apply it to the soil or plant? What's your experience with
Hmm.
that?
That's a good question. Um, when it comes to enzymes or something else that's a part of a response, usually those molecules are kind of big. The plant's not taking them up, the plant's making them.
Mhm.
Okay. The microorganisms, though, do make those signal molecules to trigger that system, but the plant has to do the job. Now, the microbes on the roots will make fungicides that protect the roots. They will sequester iron, which will protect the roots and then reduce. They will make chelators, which hold on to some of the nutrients and activate the enzymes that they produce, that the microbes produce. But really, when I'm looking at the plant response itself, I'm more interested in the cofactors, those trace elements that turn on enzymes, or the transcription factors that literally activate parts of the DNA in the plant to make the enzymes. So if you can
Wow.
stimulate the production of enzymes and then activate the enzymes they produce, with either coenzymes or cofactors. That's the job of the molecules that the microbes are making.
All
Yeah,
right. Well, once again, every time we get together, mind blown, Harley, mind blown. I mean,
yeah,
you understand this so well, and it's so generous of you to share it with all of us because you lay things out. It's incredible. So thanks for taking the time to learn all that and taking the time to share it with all of us. Boy, it's very, very good information, and you lay it out great. So,
yeah,
boy, thanks a lot for that.
yeah. Uh, that's one of the things I like about the biostimulants is they work across the board because they stimulate the metabolism of the microorganisms that are already there in the soil. So we can add some strains that we know are beneficial that might not be there, but then the biostimulants are going to help with that job. If we try to get very specific with the strain, then the plants develop specific strains of plants develop specific relationships with microbes. You'd have to do a different microbial blend for every different kind of crop, which is
Hmm.
possible, and even every different strain. But if you can stimulate the metabolism of the microbes, it's across the board. It'll if as long as there's microbes, beneficial microbes there to begin with, the plant those they will be fed by the plant. They'll start to vibrate with energy. They'll divide, pop, pop, pop. That's when they're going to make the plant protection agents as they're actively dividing. So it isn't just the microorganism by itself in a vacuum. It's part the microorganism is part of a system, and
Exactly.
we need to rev up the engine of that complete system for it to work at optimal efficiency.
That's right. And that's why it's important to always have something growing in soil. Bare soil, when the growing conditions are there, it's very important to have something growing because, like you said, the exudates from other plants stimulate other microbes, and that's one easy way to keep your biodiversity in the soil is always have something growing, and then and different species growing. I know a lot of our customers are really getting into cover crops and the big cocktail mix of seeds that they just get started and get growing and turn it back into the soil just to improve that soil biology. It took me a long time to understand that. You have to see it to believe it and understand it. But boy, that the bare soil with nothing growing when growing conditions are there, it's very harmful if you're trying to establish that soil microbiome. Um, so once again, it all comes back to the biology.
Yeah, yeah. I think we'll be talking about all of this stuff for. We can talk about it for another year and still barely scratch the surface
I
of
agree.
what we need to know. And I'm glad you're going to these conferences too, and at least you're hearing from the university studies. I'm just so disappointed that the best minds in this the United States of America in agriculture are are focusing on making new poisons
Yeah.
when there's
Yeah.
not nearly enough on the
Mhm.
microbiology and plant nutrition.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Because a lot of their funding to do these comes from the big manufacturers, the pesticide manufacturers and fungicide manufacturers. So of course they're going to, focus, research on that and so on and so forth. But yeah, it's to the point where it's getting so out of hand, in my opinion. But thanks to people like myself and people like you and a lot of our customers out there, the one thing we can do to make a change is do a change on what we're doing. We we got to look at ourselves. What can we do better? What can we do different? And the more people that get on board with that, the better the outcomes will become as far as food and what we put in our body and our environment and just the toxins we're surrounded by every day. We got to start by making a personal choice to try to do this ourselves and one garden at a time, one field at a time, just do the best we can do.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the encouraging thing though is I am seeing more of a trend.
Hmm.
It's not just keeping on going down the path of chemicals.
Yeah.
You know,
Hmm.
if we're seeing more and more work on biofertilizers, right?
Hmm.
There's a little more on biostimulants. I'm seeing them in ag being used more. I mean,
Yeah.
not as much as their full potential, but I'm seeing it. There is a trend there, and for plant protection as well. So, the biofungicides. It's not
Hmm.
totally being ignored. It just, I don't think it's as prioritized as it should be, but that's my opinion. My
No,
opinion as a
I'm
scientist
on
who's
board with
been
that.
doing this
Yeah, I'm on board with that. I think one of the next big wave, and we may have touched on this before, are the biopesticides. There's a lot. There's a lot of companies have really advanced. Quite a bit in the biopesticides, and yeah, we need to keep exploring that and just find ways we can still get results, but not forcing us to live in a toxic environment. So
it.
one step at a time.
Yeah, I'm gonna I'm gonna tell a little secret here. I mean, it's not a bad secret, but a little secret that's probably a little not known as much. There are some microbes that are effective against nematodes. Okay,
Hmm.
but sometimes if the microbiologist puts that on the list, or even says it's effective against nematodes, all of a sudden that living microorganism that's in the soil already becomes has to be registered as a pesticide.
Yeah, yeah.
And there we go. Here's again. You gotta what? I mean, this is natural. This isn't a chemical. But oh, you made a claim. Hold on, that's
Yeah, that's true. Happens all the time. Yeah, you can't. You got to be careful. Got to be careful what you say, because yeah, they'll shut you down. We've been shut down before with products that say too much on the label, and
mhm.
it's kind of the forum we're in. It's the guidelines we have to follow to do what we do, but it's very very frustrating.
It can be. Sometimes it's better just to keep your mouth shut about it, and um, and then just have this positive side effect that people didn't expect. Oh wow, I don't have my problems with nematodes anymore. Ooh, wow, that's interesting. You know. Now,
Hmm.
so in other words, I'm
Exactly.
not trying to get around I don't recommend getting around the regulations. It's just that again, not just the chemical companies, but our own government and our own regulatory agencies still are behind, far behind the science and the new frontiers in working with nature in a natural way.
Hmm.
That's the only
I
point I
agree.
wanted to make with that. Okay, I
Yep.
guess
Well, we
we're out of time
better
here.
wrap it up here. We're getting to the
Okay.
our time limit. So another good discussion. Safe travels. Looking forward, and yeah, thanks for letting Kelp4less sponsor you in these events you're going to. This will be
Yep.
exciting.
I'm putting in. I'm going to wear my Kelp4less lab coat. I'm going to do the Giant Pumpkin Growers Association meeting, and I'll put in a little plug for you about these webcasts, so people can
Okay,
go
that's
on there
good
and
idea.
watch. Maybe we'll get some more viewers. So
Okay,
anyway,
good idea.
see you next week.
All right, see you. Thanks, Harley. Bye
Bye.
bye.